What is going on, gunfighters? Welcome. Hopefully welcome back to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting the right way with God at the center, Judeo-Christian values and real-world first-hand experience. Today is going to be a bit of a throwback. So if you've listened for years, you'll know that when this first started, I would just a lot of times talk into the iPhone. A lot of times on my way back and forth from work or the range, a lot of times they're one and the same thing, and talk to you guys about guns and gun stuff. So that's what we're going to do today. Today, probably going to be a shorter episode on compensators and ported barrels. I'll do an abbreviated bio. God is number one. I hope to recognize that and keep him at the center of my life, and everything that I do in this podcast is no different. He's blessed me to get me through a lot of adverse conditions. Marine Corps combat veteran, went to war a couple of times, also served in the U.S. Army, also worked law enforcement for quite a number of years, LAPD, regular assignments and more specialized assignments. I've also been a private contractor for, well, let's just say I was a private contractor. Been blessed to be a professional gunfighter most of my adult life. Also grew up hunting and shooting, and have been a professional big game hunter and guide. There's a lot more that I normally say, but again, abbreviated bio, that's probably enough. And again, the number one thing in life for me is God. And I consider myself first and foremost a servant, and I am very humbled and very blessed that I get to talk to you guys, and that you guys turn to me for advice. That's very humbling, and I don't ever want to take that for granted. And hopefully, I'm a good shepherd and a good steward of the talents God's given me. So thank you. Thank you to the audience, and a special thank you to the patrons. This is actually a Patreon chat that got turned into a podcast. So, compensated and ported barrels. I should specify on handguns. A lot of handguns, the military has been running compensators on long guns for a long time. The Thompson submachine gun, I do believe, had a compensator. The M14 and M16s have flash hiders, but they also kind of work to reduce muzzle rise as a compensator. But mostly today, going to talk about on handguns, ported barrels and compensators. They are becoming more prevalent, I've noticed, especially in the, let's say, carry handgun world. They've been popular for a long time in the competition world. And as things go, usually the competition world proves what's good, and then the civilian, military, law enforcement adopt it, usually quite a bit behind the curb. But we're getting to the point where ported barrels and compensators are becoming common for carry handguns. So, what are some pros and cons? Let's start out with ported barrels. So, if you don't know, ported barrel is basically where they cut holes in the top of a barrel. And the idea behind this is, and the physics behind this is, that as that bullet passes that point, that gas vents out the top of the barrel, either straight up or at some kind of angle on both sides, and it forces the muzzle down to some degree. So the muzzle will rise less than it would without those ports cut in the barrel. That's the idea behind a ported barrel. That is really the advantage of a ported barrel. It usually does, it's not just a theory, it usually does actually reduce muzzle climb. So that's a real thing. That's its benefit. That's why it exists. That's why they do that. I'm not aware of any other reason that one would do that. So there's the pro. What are the cons? Well, there's a few. Number one will be cost. Now, if you're just a baller, or you're just saving up and got a lot of discipline, and you're going to buy the best gun for you, whatever condition it is, whatever it costs, then that doesn't really apply to you. But cost is a thing. If you get two similar guns, unless you find one used and it's a good deal, generally the one with a compensated, as I was with a ported barrel, and a lot of times corresponding cuts in the slide, because the gas has to vent up through the slide. That's extra machining. That's extra steps. It's extra work that has to be done on the gun. So naturally, most of the time, that's going to be a more expensive gun. So cost is a con. Also, anytime you introduce more steps, you get the chance that one of those steps is going to get messed up and give you more of a chance for error, because you're adding more things into the original design that weren't there. Assuming you're taking like a Glock 19 and making a Glock 19C, which is a thing. It's their Glock 19 with a cut barrel and the cut slide. Another disadvantage of this, and I started running ported barrels, I guess it would have been around 2009. I had a Glock 21 that I carried on duty, and I bought a Glock 21C. And I quickly discovered that I was loading my own ammo at the time, that if you shot some ammo through there, it would literally shred the bullets, because the bullet's spinning as it's passing through the barrel, and it would literally shave off parts of bullet and stick them up against the slide. Not on all bullets, but on a lot of like semi-wad cutters, I would notice that it would actually shear off parts of the bullet, because I could see lead stuck up and spattered underneath the slide of the gun. So that's a consideration. Another one, if you're thinking about it for defensive use, is that extra gas, which a lot of times has unburnt powder, which is that flash that you see when you shoot at night a lot of times, that flash is going to be directed up into your line of sight. And, that's a lot of times overblown. If you're using low flash powders and things like that, it's not a huge deal, but it is a consideration. Now, here is perhaps to me the biggest downfall of a ported barrel. And that is you're, for all intents and purposes, reducing your barrel length. Since that gas is venting out when those ports are in the barrel, let's say that you have a 5-inch barrel. I'm just throwing out numbers. Let's say you have a 5-inch barrel and you poured it at 3.5 inches. You've essentially made that, as far as your bullet velocities go, a 3.5-inch barrel, as I understand it, because that gas is venting up. It has a release point where the gas is designed to shoot up through those holes. So you're losing that pressure. That's how it works to drive the muzzle down. But you're also losing that pressure that's pushing that bullet faster and faster and faster till it exits the barrel. If you don't know most handguns, the longer the barrel, the more velocity you're going to get for a given load. Like, let's say I load a real common Spear Gold Dot 115 grain as my defensive ammo. That is going to have more velocity out of a 5-inch barrel than out of a 3-inch barrel. Because the longer that barrel, the longer that bullet is in the barrel, the more pressure is going to build up, the more velocity is going to build up. It takes time for all that powder to burn. That being said, when I put ports in there, I kind of cut that barrel length back in effect. The barrel is still as long, so I still have to deal with that long barrel for concealment or whatever, but I lose that velocity. And if we're talking about this for a carry gun, a lot of times those barrels start out short. So you're essentially going from, like, let's say a compact size gun to a subcompact size gun as far as barrel length go. Or if you're dealing with like a micro subcompact and you port a gun or port a barrel, you're just making it that much smaller. So you lose some velocity. What's the big deal? Well, maybe none, but maybe a lot, because if you don't know, hollow points, modern expanding defensive ammunition, is velocity based, and it has a certain threshold where if you go under that threshold, that round will not expand, and will not expand either at all, or it won't expand as reliably, or it won't expand to the same diameter. If you think about that hollow point, if you just take it and face it down and drop it on the ground, it's not going to expand. You can't just take it. You can't just take the bullet and shove it into somebody and have it expand. That's not how it works. It takes a lot of velocity. That's just me picturing somebody shoving a unloaded hollow point into somebody's chest. But it won't do anything. It won't expand. It'll just poke them and hurt. But that being said, it takes a certain velocity to make that mushroom, to make that hollow point expand. And when you cut down that barrel length, especially in a gun that already has a short barrel, you're further reducing its velocity. Let's say, and I'm just making up numbers, I have no I'm just kind of going from memory and from what I know on ballistics. Let's say you're shooting that 115 grain defensive load that's got an advertised velocity of 1,200 feet a second. It's a good, stout, 9mm, 124 grain, 1,200 feet a second. That's the velocity on the box. Well, number one, those velocities on the box tend to be rather generous. Number two, that's for, usually they test that in a full-size handgun. So you're talking Glock 17-ish size. If you're shooting that out of a 19, you're going to get less velocity. If you now take that and put that in a gun with a ported barrel, you pretty much reduce it to whatever that port size is. So you might be dropping down. I'm just making up numbers. I don't have a chronograph in front of me. I'm not doing this for real. But let's say you drop down to 900 feet a second on that hollow point. Is that enough for that hollow point to expand? Well, you have to make sure you know that. And not like think that, but you know that it's actually going to work as much as you can if you drop the velocity down that low. And to me, that is the biggest drawback if you're talking about a defensive handgun. That is a fact that if I have two identical pistols shooting this, let's say I have a Glock 19 and a Glock 19C with the cuts in the barrel and the slide. If I shoot the exact same load, let's say, a NATO ball ammo out of both pistols, I'm going to get less power out of the ported barrel. That's just a fact. But you will also get less muzzle climb. So you got to weigh your options there. There's no free lunch. It's all compromises. You're giving something up and hopefully gaining something. Which one of those is more important to you? Another thing one of the gentlemen pointed out in the Patreon chat is that shooting from retention, those hot gases have to go somewhere. If the gun is out in front of your face with your arms extended, not a huge deal. Again, maybe if you're shooting at night, it's a thing to consider. But if it's pressed up against your body or in your pocket, don't think you can't shoot a gun from your pocket if you have to. That's just more gas venting out. That's how that works. And although I've never had that be a problem, I could see where it could be a problem. A subcompact 357 SIG with a ported barrel, firing that, next to your rib cage in a close contact shot. I could see where that may be something, at least to consider. That being said, I've never had the cylinder gap on a gun be a problem, but again, it probably is gun dependent and your technique dependent, but it is something to consider for sure. Okay, so what about compensators? There's a couple of different ways compensators can be attached. If you're familiar with the 1911, it has a barrel bushing, at least a traditional design. My STIs have a barrel bushing. I have one that has a compensator that goes in lieu of the barrel bushing. Wilson Combat has made these for a long time. Mine is a Wilson Combat. I did carry it on duty. It works well. It does what it's supposed to do. And it doesn't reduce the barrel length. It goes on the end of the barrel, outside the barrel. So all those things I said about making the barrel shorter, they don't apply. But what it also does is add more weight. Now, you might want more weight out of the front of the gun. You may not want more weight out of the front of the gun. That is going to affect things, especially your transitions. Rule of thumb from the competition days was it might increase the speed of your follow-up shot. So if you're doing 2 on one target, but it may also increase your transition time from one target to another. An object at rest tends to stay at rest, and an object in motion tends to stay in motion. So if I'm shooting, let's say, one target and then another target quickly, that gun is stopped on the first target. I have to shoot it, get that gun into motion, and then stop that gun from its motion to shoot the second target. So with what I just said with, the Newtonian laws of physics, an object at rest stays at rest and an object in motion stays in motion, especially with more weight at the end of that gun where it's the most leverage, it's harder to start and stop. So that's something you got to play around with. It's not all just benefits. Although you do get the not having to cut the barrel down shorter. The other most common and probably most common one today is a lot of guns, a lot of the more modern guns either come with a threaded barrel or give you an option for a threaded barrel. And a lot of that is for suppressors, but you can also put a compensator on there. And I do have a gun like this. It is one of my go-to guns that I shoot and practice with a lot, and it has a screw-on compensator. I wish I could remember who made it. It's a good compensator. It's very minimalist, but it does work. It does actually help out, reduce muzzle rise. And I can't remember who makes it, but it's very small, very minimal. It is obviously going to make that gun longer, though, just like that Wilson Combat. I actually took the Wilson Combat break how it came, and it had 3 chambers on it. I cut like 1.5 of the chambers off of it because it was so big that it was kind of a pain to carry on duty. So I cut it down to the first chamber and a little bit more, kind of made a striking device with it, and carried it like that because it added a little bit of length, but it still fit in the same holster, so I wasn't giving up much there as far as carryability, and it added a few ounces. But I was carrying it in a war belt. I wasn't concealed carrying it, so I was willing to make that trade. Those little micro comps, they might add less weight and less length, but you're still adding some weight and some length. So you have to weigh that option. There's a point of diminishing returns where it gets too big and so heavy that you're probably not going to carry it. So that's the big thing with the compensators, I would say, unless you're running a 1911, and most people aren't anymore. You're probably, in today's modern world, dealing with some kind of aftermarket slide attachment compensator or a screw-on threaded barrel compensator. And again, the benefit to that is it's going to help some of that gas vent down and keep that muzzle from rising as much. But you're going to add weight and you're going to add length to the gun. And you're not going to add sight radius, especially if you're shooting with iron sights. So generally, if I'm moving to a longer gun with iron sights, I'm going to get a longer sight radius, which is going to help me be more accurate, especially at speed. So with that, that's kind of your risk reward there for that, for the compensators and the brakes. I may be forgetting one or two things, but I think that's pretty much a good summation of the benefits and the detriments of ported barrels and compensators on guns, especially like fighting handgun. Anyway, I just want to thank you guys again for listening. Unless this is your first rodeo here at the Gunfighter Life podcast, you know how to contact goodshepherdtraining.com. That's all I'm going to say. I am looking out over the beautiful Pacific Ocean. The sun just set. Your tactical verse of the day, one of my favorites, Psalm 19. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows us his handiwork. With that, men, thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.